Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the land. So far we've seen that God has rescued the Israelites out of Egypt. He's rescued them from slavery. His plan is to make them a kingdom of priests through which, or a nation of priests through which all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And if you remember, that's what the original promise to Abraham was that all the peoples would be blessed. And we saw how God gives them a law. He gives the people a law. He gives them the 10 Commandments, which are very general principles of how he wants his people to live. And then he breaks down those 10 Commandments into very specific rules about how they should be living then in the ancient Near East. And we saw how he gives them the tabernacle. And we saw how the tabernacle is the way that God can live with his people. So we get the idea of God's people under God's rule in God's place. Because God's going to be there in the tabernacle. But what we come to now is the fact that God isn't just going to stay with them at Mount Sinai, but the idea is they're supposed to move into the promised land, the land of Canaan that was promised to Abraham. So, this is what happens. The people head out from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab, and they're ready to enter the promised land and be God's people under God's place, under God's rule. But there's a problem. The people just keep on complaining. And they even start complaining like, oh, I want to go back to Egypt. We had watermelons. There's times you think, what's with these watermelons? They just keep on going on about how they want the watermelons back in Egypt. Never mind the fact they were treated as slaves. Keep on going on about these watermelons. They grumble about Moses' leadership. And even people start chatting about Moses' wife. And they start gossiping about Moses' wife. You know, it's a bad situation. It's not looking good. And then they send out some spies into the promised land. So they send some spies into the land of Canaan. And the spies come back, because obviously you want to send spies before you go into the land. And the spies come back and say, oh, this is a great land. It's flowing with milk and honey. Which isn't a saying we use these days, you know. But it might be like these days if you said, oh, the streets are paved with gold, you know. So people are like, yeah, but then they say, but the place is really fortified. And the men there are huge. And suddenly everyone's like, oh no, we can't take these guys. Even though God's brought them out of Egypt and he's destroyed the Egyptians, you know, which is the world superpower then. Even though that's just happened, these people are still like, no, we can't go into the promised land. And so they actually refuse to go into the promised land. And God obviously is not happy about this. God is the person who has made these Israelites, his people, his treasured possession. And he's the person who's made this covenant with them. And he said, you are going to be my kingdom of priests. And I'm going to bless the whole world through you. And these guys straight away are like, no, we're not going in the promised land. We're not going to do that. So God says, okay then, you guys won't go in the promised land. Instead, for 40 years, I'll make you wander the wilderness. Make you wander around in the desert. And that's what they do. For 40 years, that generation just wander around the desert. And yeah, if you've got a study Bible, sometimes you can look at a map of it and see how they're just going round. Like in the desert. And it's such a shame because they could have gone into the promised land. So what happens is that generation dies off. And about 40 years later, God now allows the new generation that's grown up, he allows them to go into the promised land. And Moses is still their leader, but Moses has been told he can't go into the promised land. And there's going to be a new leader now called Joshua, who's like Moses' sidekick. And what happens is before they go in the promised land, Moses warns them that they're either going to experience blessings from God or curses from God. And so it's on your handout here, Deuteronomy 28 verse 1. Right, these are the blessings and curses. Moses warns them, he warns the new generation, if you indeed obey the Lord your God and are careful to observe all his commandments I am giving you today, the Lord your God will elevate you above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings will come to you in abundance if you obey the Lord your God. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the field. Your children will be blessed as well as the produce of your soil, the offspring of your livestock, the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. And then verse 9. The Lord will designate you as his holy people, just as he promised you. If you keep his commandments and obey him, then all the peoples of the earth will see that you belong to the Lord, and they will respect you. So we see here that God is again got his plan of all the peoples of the earth being blessed through the Israelites. And he's saying everything's going to be good. This is going to carry on if you follow me. So we see a bit of a difference here with the promise he gave to Abraham. The promise he gave to Abraham was unconditional. He just said, I will make you into a great nation and all the peoples will be blessed through you. But with these guys, he's actually giving them a conditional promise. And he's saying, yeah, you can be that great nation and you will be the means through which I'll bless all the other nations if you follow me. If you don't follow me, that's not going to happen. And so we move on to verse 15, Deuteronomy 28 verse 15. He says, but if you ignore the Lord your God and are not careful to keep all his commandments and statutes I am giving you today, then all these curses will come upon you in full force. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the field. And then jump ahead to verse 33. As for the produce of your land and all your labour, a people you do not know will consume it, and you will be nothing but oppressed and crushed for the rest of your lives. Verse 36. The Lord will force you and your king, whom you will appoint over you, to go away to a people whom you and your ancestors have not known, and you will serve other gods of wood and stone there. There will be very few of you left, though at one time you were as numerous as the stars in the sky, because you will have disobeyed the Lord your God. This is what will happen. Just as the Lord delighted to do good to you and make you numerous, he will take delight in destroying and decimating you. You will be uprooted from the land you are about to possess. The Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship other gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods of wood and stone. So we see here that God is giving them a conditional promise. He's saying you can be this special nation who will have the land, and you will bless all the other nations if you keep obeying my commands. But if you don't, I will kick you out of the land and you will experience all these curses.